Hi everyone, welcome back to our workshop. So my name is Julia Huang, and this workshop will be on music composers and their styles and history. So Johann Sebastian Bach is the first one we're going to look at. So he's part of the Baroque era, which is one of the beginning stages of classical music. He was born in Eisenach, Germany in 1685 from a family of musicians. So his father was a town musician in Eisenach. He taught young Johann how to play the violin, but then when he was 10, his parents died, so he was living with his older brother, named Johann Christoph, who was his church organist. Later on, Bach became known as one of the best composers of the Baroque era. Later on, Bach got his first job as a musician at the court of Duke Johann Ernst. He was providing music for religious services and special events. He also gave music instruction to the students. Because Bach knew two instruments, the violin and the organ, he sometimes served as the official violinist and sometimes as the official organist. So organs are pretty cool because they look like pianos, but with keyboards stacked on top of each other like that. And it provides when you play on it, it has a very echoey sound, which is very good for high ceilings, which are churches. They usually have very high ceilings so that the music can echo throughout the entire church. When Bach became a composer, he had this very unique style where he would have complex arrangements of different melody lines. So sometimes he would have like 2 to 4 different melodies at the same time, which is pretty complex to make. That's also similar to counterpoint, where you have different melodies all intertwined that are the same, or they have different melodies. However, when you play them together, it sounds like it goes together like a conversation. But often this type of style was criticized by church members because they preferred more simple music. Later on, Bach composed a book of the Well-Tempered Clavier, which is basically a collection of keyboard pieces like preludes and fugues, where you can help young students learn certain techniques and methods. And this example is a very cool piece to learn. And I believe it was this one. As you can see right away, this piece is mostly composed of 16th notes, and the right hand and left hand must require a lot of practice, as you need to synchronize both hands together in order to play it clear. So this way you can practice strengthening your fingers, because you're basically using mostly all your fingers in order to play each note clear. So this is a very good piece for if you want to like warm up or practice your fingers. Later on, Bach got a job as a new organist and teacher at St. Thomas Church because this church needed music for services each week. Bach was writing cantatas like every week, so he became a very prolific composer afterwards. So in his late life, he unfortunately was struggling with his eyesight, but he continued to work in music because that's what he's passionate about. He even wanted to travel and perform, so one time he visited Frederick the Great, who was the king of Prussia. And what's very interesting is that instead of playing a piece that he already made, he actually just went up there and just started making up a piece on the spot, which is pretty cool. But then after that, he got to perfect this piece by taking it home, actually remembering all the notes and making a new version in order to have a more perfected composition than the one he played on the spot. But still very cool how he made a whole new composition on the spot, which means that he's actually very good at music and he just knows how to do it. In his impact for classical music, he was actually better known as an organist than a composer back then, and few of his works were actually published. But then later on, his compositions were admired by Mozart and Beethoven, who were part of the classical era. In his music, Bach was a master at trying to invoke different emotions. He told stories, actions, and events using melodies, such as having conversations between melodies. So this is a very good example of having melody lines kind of like talking to each other. So what's pretty interesting is that the very first line, if you guys could see, this part right here, this is the melody. But then this part is the counter melody, which is like talking to each other between the two different types of melodies. But then it's kind of like having two different types of melodies playing at the same time. but this main melody is repeated throughout the piece. So like this part you see right here, this part is the same melody as the beginning part right here. And then this part is the middle voice. So if you see my cursor pointing right here, this is the middle voice, because in this piece you have 3 voices. You have the top voice, middle voice, and bottom voice. Sometimes the middle voice is played by the left hand, sometimes by the right hand. So basically this part right here is another repeated melody of this line right here. So about Bach is that he repeats the melody line throughout the piece, except for they can be in different keys, which makes it more varied. So this one is in B minor. But then this part is also the same melody. So this part is actually in B minor, so the B minor version of this melodic line right here. So which is pretty interesting. So his pieces were drawn for different musical styles, such as from the French and Italian. And like I mentioned before, he uses counterpoint. And also he also wrote fugues, which is kind of like again repeating melody with slight variations, maybe in different keys, to create different richly detailed places in his compositions. So basically throughout the entire fugue you would have the same melody repeated throughout the entire piece, and that's what's pretty cool about his compositions. Mozart is one of the famous composers of the classical era. So he was born in Salzburg, Austria, and he is pretty smart because he wrote his first composition at age 5, which is very interesting. And I believe this one was the one that he wrote. As you can see, even at age 5, he's able to create detailed compositions like this, which is very cool. Shows that he understands music very well, even at a very young age. But he's only 6 years old. He was traveling alone and to perform concerts for royal families. And when he was 7 years old, he had his first piece published. And he got his inspiration from earlier composers like Bach from the Baroque era and Haydn from the early classical era. And then in turn, Beethoven really got inspirations from Mozart. So in the classical era, a lot of the pieces, they focused on having elegance, balance, and having structure. Sometimes like rondos would have like ABA structures, strict structures. Sonatas, they might have like an A section with a different key, B section with another different key, for example. And Mozart composed music for piano, opera, and symphonies and orchestras. And here's some of his famous compositions. The Marriage of Figaro is one of the ones that are very popular. It's still played today. It's one of his most famous compositions. Later on, he wrote even more compositions. So he's actually a very prolific composer. He produced over 600 pieces in his lifetime. And I'm pretty sure that he is also very fast at composing too, so I'm pretty sure like sometimes his people would tell him to compose something like one day, and he will still compose something that's very good. So he's also a very fast composer and a very prolific composer. I'm pretty sure Two Set Violin made a joke about this, where he would have someone saying, "Oh, please compose this in like a few hours," and he would actually do it, which is like very, very cool. However, unfortunately, later on, he did fall into serious financial difficulties, and his fortunes began to grow worse. And unfortunately, he also died at a very young age, at age 35. But throughout his life, he had a very big impact on classical music. So he had a very complex and dissonant style too, sometimes in his music. And a lot of his music requires a lot of scales, a lot of arpeggios, fast scales and arpeggios, which require a lot of technical mastery, which means that pianists have to practice these scales and arpeggios slow by section in order to get them clear. And yeah, that's it. So next is Rachmaninoff, who is one of the famous composers of the Romantic era. So he was born in Novgorod, Russia, and he was actually almost going to become a military officer because his parents came from a military background. He's also part of the Russian Romanticism era, because back in the Romantic era there was a lot of Russian composers like Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, for example. And he also wrote a lot of pieces for not only piano but also for piano cello duets, but also for concertos, like this famous one right here. So one of his cousins, who was a well-known pianist and composer, he was kind of suggesting trying to send Rachmaninoff to a pianist in Moscow, and he was going to this conservatory. So in Russia, there are a lot of conservatories for music, and there still are today. And a lot of these conservatories, they have basically like music schools. Basically, they would be practicing piano every day, meeting with their teachers, which is like very cool because after that, after going to conservatory, a lot of famous and a lot of very good composers or a lot of very good pianists come out of these conservatories, which is like very cool. And he graduated from this conservatory, Rachmaninoff did, and he even won a gold medal for his opera called, I'm pretty sure it's called Aleko, but correct me if I'm wrong. He got a lot of famous popularity for a lot of his compositions, and these two are his most famous compositions, which are the Prelude in C sharp minor and the Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor. Let's see if we can show a example of this. As you can see, even starting off, his pieces have very big chords. So one thing very common in the Romantic era is that they will be having large chords, large dramatic arpeggios. On the piano, the pieces will be taking up the entire piano from like a very long range, because they want to provide this like very dramatic, very beautiful piece, this big piece. And here he has very big chords in his opening. So here it's a piano and orchestra. So basically this line right here is played by the piano, but this part is played by the orchestra. So this one, it kind of serves as the piano is the accompaniment, and then the orchestra or the strings right now are the melody. So basically, in a lot of his pieces, Rachmaninoff will be having this single note melody, but also having giant arpeggios as the accompaniment in the left hand, which makes it very dramatic, very beautiful, and that's what he's trying to portray right here. So again, very dramatic, but also very beautiful. So later on, because during his time there was the Russian Revolution, he went to live with his family in Dresden, and he wrote even more compositions. And then afterwards, he did go to exile, which is he was kind of dividing his time between living in Switzerland and in the United States, and here he wrote 2 more compositions. So again, this Romantic era is a very, very creative, very explosive change. It's very different from the previous eras. So his compositions really paved the way for this very unique style of the Romantic era. The last composer we're going to visit is Tchaikovsky. So he was born in, I'm pretty sure it's called Vatsky, or something like that, in this small town in the Russian Empire. And even at a very early age, just like Mozart, he had a lot of talent in music. So even at age 4, he was composing his first song, or his first composition. Later on, age 17, he was influenced by this Italian singing instructor, and this instructor really appreciated Tchaikovsky's musical talents. And later on, Tchaikovsky had a very lifelong passion for Italian music, and sometimes his pieces would have a little bit of Italian influence as well. So he was actually part of the Ministry of Justice at first. He was a clerk, but then afterwards he decided to kind of dedicate his life to music. So that he composed a lot of popular compositions, such as for ballets, like we see Swan Lake, the Nutcracker, and things like that. He also composed a lot of pieces for symphonies and also for the piano. During his late life, he was concentrating on his third Pushkin opera, and it's very interesting because he wrote this Queen of Spades in just 44 days, which is only around a month or two, and it's also considered one of his finest. So even with classical music, if you only take like 1 or 2 months to compose it, that's still considered a very short amount of time. And he composed this very, very cool piece. But then, unfortunately, on October 21st, he was ill and diagnosed with cholera, which was kind of widespread throughout St. Petersburg, Russia at the time. Unfortunately, he did die 4 days later from complications arising from the disease. So, just like Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky was also a very leading composer of the Romantic era, and he also had Russian influence in his music. He also does have German influence, French influence, Italian influence, and etc. So overall, that's an overview of all the composers. Actually, I do want to show one more piece. This is the one that I played when I'm pretty sure, in elementary school somewhere. So this piece is very beautiful because he wrote the seasons, which is basically he wrote a kind of a piece for every month. So he wrote January, February, all the way to June, and June, in my opinion, is my favorite. It's very beautiful because it has a very slow but also sometimes dramatic parts of his piece. So something to note here is that he has these repeating melody lines, but then plays them with a lot of variation. So like from here to here, this part is one phrase, and this is the start of the next phrase. This part is starting the second phrase. As you can see, this part is very similar to this part right here, except for he adds variations. He adds these extra notes right here. So he's trying to repeat his melodic lines. However, he uses variation in order to achieve this more complex piece. So he repeats this throughout. So he will be having different melody lines and repeating them, but with variations. So as you can see, even here as well, he has the same pattern of having this phrase from here to here. So, and starting from here and then ending right here, and starting a new phrase from right here and all the way through right here. As you can see, this part is also very similar too. So this part right here is almost very similar to this part, except for this one ends in F and this one ends in D. So he's trying to achieve this differing part, but also keeping the same basic melodic line. And here it's very different because here's like it's dying down. Here's like the notes are falling down and falling down, but here it's going up. So it's like notes are going up, like something is going to happen afterwards. This part actually reminds me of Chopin because I remember in one of Chopin's waltzes, he had a very fast transition from B minor to B major, and here he's trying to do this too. I'm not sure if he got influence from Chopin or not, but this part is very similar to what Chopin did. So in this piece right here in June Barcaroli, it's actually in G minor, but here he transitioned to G major, which shows that he wanted to achieve this contrast. So this piece reminds me of trying to sit peacefully in a boat in the sunset, but then this part is kind of like it's maybe daytime or maybe something else happened. So basically, again, this very cool contrast, but it also reminds me of what Chopin did too. Here's also the same thing too. So here it's one line from here to here, And here he's repeating the line but with an extra note. So this is 2 notes as a chord, but this is 3 notes as a chord. So that part you just heard is actually the peak of the entire piece. This part is considered the kind of the climax of this June Barcaroli piece. And it's very interesting how he used diminished chords to represent this type of suspension, this type of hanging there. But then afterwards, the piece becomes very calm after he plays these types of long diminished chords. So as you can see, overall, these composers are all very unique from each other, but they're all equally successful, and they're all very great composers in the classical music. So overall, this is a overview of music composers and the music styles and history, and I really hope you enjoy this workshop. Thank you.